Good afternoon, everyone. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's Cicero, right? So I'm speaking in English. I'm flattered by the invitation, the opportunity to be here. Is it okay from this? It's an honor to share the panel with distinguished colleagues. My presentation here, my aim is to provide some context for our discussion of the crisis, the current crisis, from a political science point of view. The metaphor that I've chosen to talk about the current crisis is the idea of a perfect storm, right? Why we have a perfect storm, I will go into that in details in shortly, but let me start by presenting the plan of this presentation. I'll speak about briefly about the causes of this perfect storm. Then I'll focus on the institutional and non-institutional determinants of the crisis. Institutions are choice variables in the sense that we can perfect institutions, we can change rules. It's very difficult, as we know. But there are exogenous sources of the current crisis that we can't change. So I'm going to also be speaking about that. And we have a storm here, but we also have a silver lining, right? And that's my third topic in this presentation. So I think this black swan in Brazil currently, our perfect storm is a black swan because it is a rare combination of events. We have to really stress that point because this is really important. We've had the most dramatic change in economic output over a century. So we're not talking about the typical business cycle. We're talking about economic collapse, 3 years in a row of a decay in output. That's unprecedented. We have a colossal fracture in the parliamentary support basis, at least until very recently. We had a gargantuan corruption scandal. The level of corruption that has been exposed, I'm talking about exposure, not about observed corruption, because corruption is elusive, right, by its very nature. It is clandestine, so we don't observe. But the level of exposure of corruption that we've seen in Brazil is truly unprecedented in any democracy. Because we could use the metaphor, Bismarck's metaphor of you don't want to know about how politics is done, and it is ugly, but the level of corruption that we've been exposed to in graphic details is truly unprecedented in any democracy, I would conjecture. And we've also seen amazing political discontent, not only political malaise, but true social mobilization. And this combination of events is really unprecedented. We've seen economic collapse without the government losing its support basis. We've also seen governments losing its support basis without exposure of corruption, and there is a clearly identifiable in empirical work interaction effect between economic crisis or economic problems and corruption and how it affects popularity and so on. So the two things are magnified because they occur simultaneously. So I'm going to focus more. We could explore the reasons why. Sorry? I'm going to focus on the fragmentation of the political system. That I'll start with that. We can go into details of why is it that we're doing well until 2007 and then things went in disarray, but I'll focus on that. Our political system has been fragmented to an extent that is truly unprecedented as well. So there are lots of unprecedented things. Right? That's why I call this presentation the Black Swan. I'm going to show you some evidence of party system fragmentation, the number of political parties in Brazil and so on, and the reasons for that. Let me, before I go into these topics, let me just show some data on the effective number of political parties, right? It's not the number of parties, it's not the nominal list of parties we have in Brazil. It is the number, which is widely used by political scientists. It's a metric that weighs the share of seats in parliament, right? So it gives weight to larger parties and really disconsider very small parties. So in the database of political parties and their seat shares and so on, that covers over 50 years in 100+ countries by Gallagher, Brazil ranks second place in the highest number of effective political parties anywhere, anytime in a democracy. There's one exception, it was Russia under Yeltsin for 1 year, and then Brazil over the last 5 years, we rank number one. So the level of political fragmentation is not seen anywhere else, right? It's not only that, in Brazil, we had a reduction in this effective number of political parties from 90 to 98, and then it started increasing again. But what is truly amazing is that at the same time that we create parties, there has been a sharp collapse in party identification. So people don't feel identified with any party. This is the blue here, the dark blue here area is the share of the population that doesn't identify with any parties, right? So at the same time that we create parties, we don't feel that parties really mean anything. So this is really a matter for concern, okay? So why is it that we have so many parties? We adopt proportional representation. So this is the first reason why we have a multi-party system. But why so many parties? First, because we have a high district magnitude. Our district in Brazil, the electoral district, is the state. So we have state with 80 representatives, 70 representatives, like São Paulo. And in elections, we have over 1,000 candidates for representatives for São Paulo. This magnitude is the reason why, this is clearly demonstrable, why we have so many parties, but not this extreme fragmentation that we have, right? So why is it that we have this extreme? Because of party financing rules. We have this pool that finances parties, the fundo partidário, right? And when you create parties, and this is surprising at the same time, because in Brazil, unlike Argentina or many other countries, we can't have provincial parties. We can't have the party of Paulistas as we have in Argentina or in Canada or in India, and there are so many of them in India. So at the same time, we have rules that goes into the direction of preventing parties to explode, the number of parties to explode. We have this explosion. So this is really amazing because we have this fragmentation without even having provincial or state level parties. So this is, because we have this colossal district magnitude, our elections are so expensive. We have the most expensive elections, taking into account purchasing power parity in the world. So first one would be the US, if we didn't take that into account. So we have this party system fragmentation. We also have the fact that the partisan powers of the president has been collapsing. So for a presidential system to exist, we have to have a president with the support of a reasonable party. So the share of seats of the Workers' Party in Brazil declined to reach 10%. There's no other presidential system with a president whose party has only 10%. At the same time, the popularity collapsed, as I will show you in details. But at the same time that we have this mess, we have structure in chaos, right? This fragmentation at the state level is even more impressive, right? In 9 states, the largest party has 1 representative. So in a third of the Brazilian states, we've reached the maximum possible, mathematically speaking, fragmentation. In 2/3 of the parties, we have only, the largest parties have only 2, up to 2, and so on. So why, moving now to the structure in chaos, until very recently, we've had 2 camps in Brazil, and that serves as a structure in the political system. So there is a lot of political competition. The races are very competitive. At the same time, the margin of victory, unlike many other countries in Latin America, is very sharp, and this is very good for our democracy. But this system has collapsed in the sense that instead of having 2 presidential parties, viable presidential parties, we now have a 3rd one in 2015 with a 1/5 of the seats. And as I mentioned, our presidents are very weak, and at the same time, in a system like that, we have serious problems of coalition management because there are so many coalitions. With 17 parties in a coalition, Brazil has the 2nd ever, larger coalition ever talked about in political science. The exception to that is the BJP in India in 2000. With 22, but 18 of the parties were provincial parties. In Brazil, we have 17 national parties. So this is the scale of our fragmentation. So coalition management has involved the allocation of ministerial portfolios, heterogeneity in coalitions. This is a reason, this is a cause of political cynicism in Brazil. Because we have seen ideologically distant parties shaking hands. The famous picture of Maluf and Haddad shaking hands is exemplary in that aspect. Also, these coalitions involve the allocation of budgetary amendments and so on. So the growing cost of governability has risen in Brazil. I'm not going to the details of this study of the cost of governability, how we built this index, but it has increased to a point that it has practically imploded. And the necessity of coalition has also increased significantly over the last 15 years. But now we've reached the final topic in this presentation, which has to do with the silver lining, right? The light at the end of the tunnel. In Brazil, corruption has superseded all other issue areas as the most important concern in Brazil. People are concerned about corruption, and this is an estimate in the study that we did for all elections since 1998. We estimate the effect of involvement in corruption on the probability of re-election for federal deputies. Right? It involves thousands of federal deputies, candidates, and those elected, and so on. And we show that corruption matters more and more over time. At the same time, our daily experience with corruption is not very relevant. Brazil ranks very well in terms of how everyday corruption affects our lives. And we can go into detail of that later, but I have to skip that because I have very little time. So as we see here, over the last 5 years, we have seen this very sharp decline in popularity, which has to do with the economic, the fiscal rules, the economic rules, and also the effect of the exposure of corruption on presidential popularity and so on. The magnitude of the challenges we are facing are truly amazing, okay? This is a conjecture. I can't tell that for sure, but I don't suppose there has ever been a democracy where, at the same time, the Supreme Court had to deal simultaneously with the impeachment of a president or a head of state, and at the same time, the judgment of the most popular president or politician in recent history, and at the same time impeaching the president of the second power, which is the Chamber of Deputies. So the magnitude of the challenges are really amazing. We can go into the details in the Q&A into the reasons why we have so costly elections and what kind of reforms you can do into that. I'm really glad that Professor Barroso is here, because prior to his assuming a post in the Supreme Court, he organized an event in Brasilia, and I had the pleasure to participate, to discuss electoral reform. So, and I'll go into what I call, which is the current debate in Brazil involving the current government, the dual illegitimacy problem. Because Lins, the famous presidential scholar, he talked about the dual legitimacy problem in presidentialism. So we're facing something unique these days, with is the dual illegitimacy in the current situation. Thank you very much.